I'd like to welcome everyone back to the third session of Haftarah of Intertext with Dr. Jon Kelsen. This is part of Drisha's Summer Zman, where the afternoons are open up to the public, and we're glad to have you. Sources for today will be coming from Chukat Balak. And with that, I'm going to hand things over.
Okay, thanks, Kayla. Hi, everybody. Good to be with you. Let me put into the chat, as is our practice, the text of the Haftarah, which is a beautiful one from the prophet Micha, one of the 12 minor in quantity but not quality, the 12 minor prophets, and it is appended by tradition from, I put into the chat, chapters 5 and 6 from the book of Micha, appended to Parshat Balak. If last week's Parshat Chukat was sort of, was kind of all over the place, a lot of different stories. Balak, almost from beginning and basically to the very, very end, is one continuous narrative, the story of Balak and Bilam. Even at the end, the episode at Shittim, which is referenced in the Haftarah, actually, we are told, not in that context, but later on, that is Al Davar Bilam, that was actually instigated by Bilam, in which case the entire parsha is one long, from beginning to end, A to Z, Aleph to Taf, is one long story of Bilam and Balak and Bilam vis-a-vis the people. And it's interesting, actually, that the Gemara on Baba Batra, around Daf Yud Daled, is discussed, page 14 is folio 14 is discussing the authorship of the various books of the Tanakh, and it says that Moshe wrote his book, meaning the Chumash, and Parshat Balak, which is Parshat Bilam, excuse me, which is what they call either a separate work or, assumedly, actually our parsha, which raises interesting question of why you'd think otherwise. But I'll leave that alone for now, unless it comes up later. What it does indicate, though, is that it sort of does hold together as its own unit, right? To the extent that the Gemara itself calls it Parshat Bilam, right? Like this sub book of Bilam. And I'll just say briefly that what is one of the things that is kind of unique about this Parshat Bilam, this book within a book, is it's a rather lengthy, as I say, narrative. It's the whole parsha, right? It's a sort of lengthy little narrative, right? On its own, which is heavily not about, it's mostly not about Moshe and Bnei Israel as much as it is about this Moabite king, Balak ben Tzipor, and this magician, sorcerer, prophet, Bilam. And of course, they're brought to bear on the Israelites' story, but much of it takes place from the perspective not of Israel, but from these outside characters. It's a quasi, sort of like a spin-off, if you will, from the main flow of the narrative and the main characters of the narrative. So it has a sort of a unique feel in that sense. But what we're going to notice is that the Haftarah, which is where we're going to spend our time, the Haftarah of Micha, explicitly references the story of and the characters actually of Balak and Bilam, and that is, of course, why part of why it is chosen as the Haftarah. But we'll sort of try to understand more deeply or widely how Micha is thinking about our parsha. So we'll reference the parsha again, but let's jump right into the Haftarah. And as Kayla said, please do jump in. And it's a nice group, but it's small enough that people can unmute and just call out. If you want to write in chat, you can do that, but it takes me sometimes. I'm not looking at the chat at that very moment, and Kayla, may get to it later. If you want to say something, by all means, imagine we're all in one room together learning. Okay. So we're in the fifth parak of Micha. Again, I'll put it in the chat, and I'll put it in the chat again. But if you have your own Tanakh, that's great. And let's just start learning. So it just picks up in the beginning. V'haya she'erit Yaakov. This is verse 6 of chapter 5 of Micha. Okay, everyone with me? Everyone with Micha? We'll see if you're with Micha. See what he has to say. Okay. V'haya she'erit Yaakov b'kerev amim rabim. I'm going to read a few psukim and then we'll discuss. V'haya she'erit Yaakov b'kerev amim rabim. And the remnant of Jacob, I'm reading the JPS translation for ease, the remnant of Jacob, She'erit Yaakov, will be B'kerev Amim Rabim, in the midst of many peoples, either in the exilic sense or just sort of in the broader, geopolitical context, right? Either amongst people in exile. Right? I should say, by the way, I apologize, that he's prophesizing roughly the same time as Isaiah, a bit before Jeremiah, before Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu actually references, or the book Yirmiyahu references Micha, which is kind of fascinating, but not our topic for today. But he's during the kings, as it says in the beginning, Micha HaMorashti, Micha, from a place called, Morasha, apparently, right? Not Camp Morasha, but rather apparently some place in the Judean areas, because he's prophesizing concerning Chazon, right? Chazal, Shomron, and Yerushalayim, on the Shomron, on Samaria, and Jerusalem, during the reigns of Yotam and Achaz and Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu is the king, who during his period there's sort of the Assyrian aggression dynamics, Sancheirav, etc. Right, and that's who is they're worrying about on the broader stage. Okay, so with that context, V'haya she'erit Yaakov b'kerev amim rabim, ketal me'it Adonai kirvivim ali Esav, like dew from Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, from dew from God shall the remnants of Jacob be, like droplets on grass. Kirvivim ali Esav, we have this language in Ha'azinu, right? Asher lo yikaveh le'ish v'lo yachel levnei Adam. In what sense? Which do not look to any man, yikaveh, look to, hope towards, rely upon, v'lo yachel levnei Adam, nor place their hope in mortals. And I'll just say at the beginning that this seems to be a broader a message of the Haftarah, of Micha and the Haftarah, and inevitably the Parsha as well. The sense of you would do well not to place your hope on men and on human beings, right? On Ish and on Bnei Adam. Better probably to have your hope be elsewhere. That is to say, on the divine, right? On God. That's going to be the basic point, which we see elsewhere in Tanakh, of course, and that is a point here. What does it do with a dew and droplets on grass? We'll come back to that in a moment. So that's verse number 6. V'haya she'erit Yaakov, in verse 7, the same beginning, but a very different image, which has befuddled Micha's readers. I mean, the commentaries have their suggestions, but befuddling. V'haya she'erit Yaakov b'goyim b'kerev amim rabim. Again, the remnant of Jacob shall be among the nations in the midst of the many peoples. Ka'aryeh b'vahamot ya'ar, like a lion among the beasts of the wild, the beasts of the forest, of the wild. Tikfir be'edreit son, here they translate as a fierce lion among the flocks of sheep, right? Asher imavar v'ramas v'taraf ve'imad seal, which is basically, everyone's helpless against it. The sheep are helpless against this lion. This lion basically, runs
a predator.
A predator, but a very successful predator, amongst these sheep. And that is how Jacob will be among these people, among these Amim Rabim. Tarom yadchal tzarecha, your hand shall prevail among your foes, and all your enemies shall be cut down. V'chol oivecha yikaretu. So to pause there, what I mean by the befuddling part is it sounds like it is two parallel verses, V'haya she'erit Yaakov, right? But two very different images deployed regarding she'erit Yaakov. One like dew. I just learned actually that Rabbi Yehuda Amital, whose name was Klein in Europe, changed his name when he came to Israel to Amital, in a reference apparently to this verse, B'kerem Rabim Ketal Me'it Hashem. So my nation, my people have become like dew. But the point being that he didn't change his name to Ami Aryeh or something like that. It's a very different image. One is one of, usually dew is in some sort of, it grows things. It's a gesture of peace, right? It's a bucolic type of imagery. It's very lovely in the morning, the dew, etc. Water is very nice, right? It feels more peaceful and nourishing than a lion, tearing apart the flock. So that's one thing that would befuddle us. I'll put that in just one moment, and I want to circle back and say, and see if I don't have any brilliant suggestions as to harmonize those two verses. Rabbi Dr actually says they're not meant to be harmonized; they're meant to be dissonant. They're just two very different images of the remnant of Jacob, right? But I want to just focus on one before I get to Beth on this she'erit Yaakov thing. This is not the first time that even Micha has referenced the She'erit Yaakov or the She'erit Israel. Already, if you happen to have your Tanachim, we can look later at chapter 2, verse 12 of Micha, which is not in our Haftarah, but just for context. I'll read it to you aloud. He says, "I will assemble, Jacob, all of you," says Micha, right? Eventually, right? Things will not good, and then it'll be good. I'll assemble all of you. Kabet Kabet She'erit Israel. I will bring together the remnant of Israel. She'erit Israel, She'erit Yaakov, and Micha himself. But this notion of a remnant doesn't just, emerge de novo in Micha. The notion of the saving remnant, right, who will be redeemed, is a very deep and common idea, right, in the Tanakh and in our tradition. Okay, where else can you think of? You can think to yourselves. You can talk up. You can write in the chat. You can just think. Where else do we have this idea of there'll be a remnant? There'll be a piece of the people who will be redeemed, but not the entirety of the people. I'm just.
Don't we say that when we say the hamakom to people who are
the Tov Sha'ara, right? That's true, right? Among the others, right? That's true as well. I'm trying to think of that. Just to illustrate what I'm getting at, if that was opaque, it occurs to me this idea of the She'erit Yaakov.
Don't we say V'lo Yovad? V'lo Yovad Sheris?
Like in the V'lo Yovad Sheris, you're saying in Tachanan?
Yeah. There's a song that we sing.
Omer Yisrael, Shemor She'iris Yisrael.
Right.
That's playing off of this. This is, so you guys right. So that's in the liturgy, which is referencing this notion. I guess what I'm getting at is that what occurred to me, I'm just want to share with you, is that it occurred to me, I was reading this, the She'erit Yaakov, is that we have it in Isaiah as well. Sha'ar Yashuv, right? Like the remnants will return. But it occurs to me that you have this all over, let's say, the Chumash, right? And also later. This idea that part of the unit, let's call it humanity or Israel or the family, part makes it through and part doesn't make it through. Right? You could start with as early, if not earlier, than Noach. Right? Noach is one, right, of the whole thing who will survive. Not all of the people, but one, right, will survive and make it through. The family of Terach, right, part of them, right, will continue the story and in a sense be redeemed, and Isaac, etc. You have it, in the story in Bamidbar in general, this idea that, right, many of the people will die out in the desert, some will make it through, right? The remnant, right, will be those who are redeemed. Actually, the Midrash, Chamushim alu Yisrael miMitzrayim, that Israel, emerged, were taken out of Egypt, Chamushim. Okay, so Chamushim, they mean armed, right? They're armed now, and they come out, and that's one type of thing. But the Midrash reads as Chamishim, right? 20%, right? 1/5 merged. Another Midrash, it wasn't 1/5, it's 1 out of 50, 1 out of 500. The point being that a select few get through, right? A select few are redeemed. And this is seems to be a deep notion, right, in the Bible. And it continues into the tradition, right? Later on, the sense that, certainly in the Second Temple period, by the way, right? All these notions are like the select few amongst the greater herd, right? Among the flock, some will be redeemed, some will be saved, right? You see this, throughout, and then people, Israel, we see ourselves, as you were just saying, Debbie, right? Shomer Israel, Shemor, She'erit Israel. See, we see ourselves as the leftover of as the remnant, right? The Ud Mutzal Me'esh, right? Many of those who survived, who were more closer to the Shoah and emerged from there, saw themselves more and more, saw themselves, right, as a remnant, right? And that is the people of Israel. All the people are the remnant, the ones who made it through, and what you do with that, you could think about that more broadly. But I'm just trying to note that this idea of She'erit Yaakov, right? It's a common biblical notion, and it is, I have to say, whatever you think of it, a very powerful way, right, for people to see themselves as the Udin Sami Eish, right, as the remnant and not the whole, right? Only some, right, actually remain and make it through. In any event, right, Sherit Yaakov V'Kerev Amim Rabim, Kital Me'et Hashem, etc.
John,
Right,
can I
people who will
interrupt?
be, yeah, just 1 moment, please,
Okay.
and then Beth, I promised Beth, and then Ruth, is they will be somehow it seems distinct. That seems to be one commonality, and I'll come to Beth. One commonality between the dew and the lion, right? They somehow are sticking, the dew on the grass. It remains distinct, and sort of droplets sit there, right? So maybe that's part of the idea. The Aryeh, one's a more violent image, a predatory. One is more nourishing, but there's a sense of them remaining distinct and separate, and you can maybe hear echoes here, unless I'm cribbing from Yaakov Meidan. You can hear echoes here of Bilam seeing the people of Israel, right, distinct, right, among the nations, right, a nation dwelling part. Let me pause there for 1 second, Beth, and then Ruth. Yeah.
When we read these first two Pesukim, what struck me, it's as if She'erit Yaakov, those of us who are the dew, it's like those of us out here in the diaspora. And then the portion, the remnant of Jacob, that's the lion, it's like the state of Israel, a technological powerhouse, a military powerhouse. And we have these two sort of contrasting populations. And, Micha obviously would have had no idea that in the 21st century we would have these two communities. But from my 21st century perspective, I read those two communities into these two Pesukim. Departi.
I think that's very interesting. I'll turn to it in 1 second. And whether it's two different communities or it's two different ways, two elements of one broader community, right? Two different wishes for a redemptive state, right? One of being more like dew, and one more like being the secure Lion of Judah. Yeah, either way, this certainly represents two different threads and two different, again, forecasts, and I'd say wishes, right? Projections, wishes of some sort of a redemptive state. Yes, thank you, Ruth.
So when Micha uses the name of Yaakov, he's referring to the north. When he uses Yaakov, it's the northern kingdom, which now is gone. And so he is addressing the She'erit Yaakov. He's talking about those who have survived at the Assyrian exile and are scattered. And in their galut, they have there's two pathways. They can be as ephemeral as dew on the grass. It's just there and then it's gone. And it's not nourishing particularly, but when you have to contrast the two. You can either be this ephemeral dew on the grass, or you can come out and be like the Aryeh B'Habehemot. You can be strong. So there are two pathways, there are two fates that Micha is envisioning for the She'erit Yaakov. So Yehuda is fine for now, but they could easily fall into the same doom as the northern kingdom. So he's talking about She'erit Yaakov. The northern kingdom is just hanging, it's not even there anymore. But the people who are the She'erit, they have a tikva. They can survive. They can even become so strong that they come roaring back. So he's two different.
Interesting. So rather than reading it as two both good, right, like sort of redemptive states, it's more of a fork in the road. You can either be as sort of, what word do you use? Not ephemeral, but temporary do, or you could. Interesting. Okay, thank you.
And the hinge is, are you going to return to Avodat Hashem or not? If you don't, you will just evaporate in the exile and disappear.
Mhm.
But if he's still seeing, you can still mend your ways and you can still come back to teshuvah, and then the remnant of you can rise up like a lion and defeat your enemies. And he's also talking to Yehuda, it's the same message. Yehuda,
Right.
you are on the brink of following your brothers into exile, and you can either choose to disappear or choose not to disappear.
Okay, so that's very interesting. Another possible way of reading the sort of the parallels in between the two verses. Okay, good. Okay, I also want to say about the reference. I'll say there are major and explicit correlations with our parsha, but it's worth noting that the imagery of Israel as lion also appears already right in our parsha. It appears elsewhere as well, but it's in our parsha and part of one of Bilam's in one of Bilam's prophecies. But there are more explicit ones, so I'll continue. This next one is also a bit confusing or there's various possibilities emerge right among interpreters. V'haya from verse 9 to 14. V'haya bayom ahunu Adonai. It'll be on that day, some day in the future. I'll destroy the horses in your midst, and I'll wreck your chariots. Harasti, that's a lot of destruction. Harasti kol misarecha, demolish your cities and your fortresses. And it goes on, I'll destroy the sorcery, right, in your practice, and you shall have no more. Here it has soothsayers, me'onenim. And here I got a reference as well that, of course, Bilam, we have the Khartoumim in Egypt, but Bilam is, of course, the major foreign prophet and in a sense, soothsayer. And actually, when Balak speaks to him in our parsha more than once, right, that he is a na'otar, he replies to him with the same language, same root at least, of ma'onanim, right? It may be a reference or an echo at least of that term onanim, or I should say a pun, right? And he replies to Balak, right? Balak says X, Bayan, Bilam replies, but maybe it also replies also implies some sort of prophetic soothsaying. Your sacred pillars, your idols will be destroyed. You will not bow down to them. I'll destroy the Asherah from your midst. In anger and wrath, retribution. Etagoyim asher lo shameyu, right? The nations which have not obeyed. I see JPS has Altikri goyim elegeim, right? Potentially in the nation, the haughty, but we'll keep our reading here, the nation. So all of a sudden we have this destructive imagery, right, of God wreaking punishment, right, upon somebody. It seems to come out of left field. What do we make of that? Now, yes.
I'm sorry. What's interesting is if you underline all the things that will be destroyed and demolished, they're all seemingly bad. The horses, we think of Egypt, the soothsayers, the idols, the blah, blah, blah. And the cities are in the middle there. Is that implying that cities by their nature?
There you go. So some therefore say that this is speaking to Israel, but it actually, it's not a punishment per se, right? As much as a release. It's a release from the binds of idolatry and everything that goes along with it. And as I think it's Radak who suggests this, because he too is puzzled, suggests that you'll no longer need these mivsarim, you no longer need these fortifications and large cities. It kind of echoes actually Parshat Shlach, now that I think of it, right? That they come to the land and they encounter the nations, and some are right in walls, and they have those walls because the nations for protection, but it implies, right, that people are afraid of that. So for Radak, what it means is that you'll no longer need to rely upon those cities and those fortifications, right? Again, cities not because they're living in Manhattan, right? And it's a great place to live. Jerusalem is a great place to live and a lot of culture, but rather because you go there for the fortification, right? You come together and I guess whatever else it brings along with it. And in that sense, Radak is probably getting this from verse 6, right? That you're going to be entering into a reality in which you are mighty and secure, but by virtue of relying not upon other human beings, okay, be it foreign kings or, sort of give it away again, foreign prophets, right? Think of Balak relying upon Bilam as he quakes in fear, right? But rather upon, right, your own upon God essentially, right, who has helped render you, right, like this mighty lion of Judah. So that's one possibility. There are other. That's assuming it's referring to Israel here, Jacob and Israel here. It is possible to read it as referring not to Israel, right? And in that case, maybe even Assyria, whoever it's referring to, right? Maybe that's the enemy. And it's saying, and anything that you rely upon, your cities, your fortifications, your soothsayers, your idols, your Asherah, everything, right? It'll all be for naught, right? And destroyed in front of this line of Judah and by extension, in front of God. These are, I think, two possibilities. I'm sure there are more. But those are two options here. Yeah, Ruth.
Okay, so the dot mikra, and I'm just looking back to see who was the editor for Micha. Hold on.
Yeah.
Just one moment, because this is the way I learned it and the way I taught it. It's not ear. The root here is not your cities. It can't be that. It has to be the root is either ayin resh as a kind of a tree or extending that ya'ar. So it's ya'arecha, like Kiryat Ye'arim is it's a city of trees. So arecha are your not your cities, but your forests. And then that matches with the other, the other part where we will cut down your asherot and are artzecha, the beginning, vichrati are artzecha, the trees of your land. Then he talks about the asherot and in the same verse 13, natashti asherecha, those are the asherah, that's the
tree thing, right?
The lady tree goddess or whatever. And the hishmarati ya'arecha, your forests, your pagan worship forests. So
this is possible. But Dr. whoever is writing this is what they're saying is interesting and possible, but
yeah,
they're obviously responding to a problem. And the problem, I think they're starting to a problem. The problem responding to is that it seems bizarre to include,
it's not talking about cities
in the list.
Yeah.
Well, unless he is, meaning the question is, why is he talking about cities, right? In the course of this, and Mivsarim, and the suggestion is he's referring to, as you're teaching us, he's responding to, he's actually not talking about cities at all. Okay.
Right.
What do they do with Mivsarim?
In general, that's the way the poetry of the Nevi'im is, that's how it's approached. You look at the first half of the verse and then the second, and it's usually the same thing twice, just like in Tehillim. And so that's your first clue of a word that doesn't seem to fit. Yeah.
I understand. Generally speaking, Mivsarim are fortresses, are strongholds, right? To that point.
Yeah.
So, I appreciate this chavruta, and it's very helpful, and it's a very clever suggestion they're making, especially in light of, what was the latter one? Asherah versus Arecha. That is very interesting. But I just want to, to my mind at least, what they're responding to a problem and they're offering a possible solution. But I don't want to elide over the problem.
Okay, all right. So Mivtzarot. Rav Zeidel references Zechariah, who talks about the harasti kol mivtzarecha, meaning the outlying villages around Jerusalem.
Okay.
It's not your in fortifications, but the towns around you.
Okay. But again, okay. So these are all possibilities. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So in any event, we have this vision of the remnant, right, of Sherit Yaakov, Sherit Yisrael, different visions of what that might look like eventually, and then some sense of destruction of all the things that we just mentioned, one way of reading it, at least, is to tie it all together, is a picture of Israel at the end of the day, which again is not relying upon human beings, is not relying or hoping to Ish or to a B'nai Adam. Assumingly, the idea is relying instead upon God in the sense of the psalmist, right? Hashem li bezrai v'ani erev esonai tov lachasot Adonai miftoach ba'adam tov lachasot Adonai miftoach b'nedivim, right? Sabuni gam sabuni, right? The sense that that one is better off, that the good life, tov, if you will, the good life, and the part the Haftarah will end with higid lecha adam ma tov, what is actually good. The good life is one which relies not upon, the princes, not upon the aristocrats and everything that comes along with them, nor along their palaces and cities and fortifications, or perhaps, other types of dwellings, idols, soothsayers, the Bilams of the world, the Balaks of the world, but rather upon Tov L'Chasot B'Hashem. Assumingly, that is part of the major message here. And as I just say, the Bilams of the world, the Balaks of the world, that is it not, apparently one of the major takeaways, if you will, or points, right, of that Parshat Bilam in the Chumash, which is the king of Balak is quaking in fear. King Balak is quaking in fear, and his people are quaking in fear of Israel approaching, and attempt to rely upon, okay, if we can't do this through kings, because kings were just defeated, we'll try to match them, on their level. You guys have a Moses, so I have someone named Bilam. And the tradition actually sees those two as, Moshe writes, Parshat Bilam is probably part of this as well, sees these kind of as thesis and antithesis, if you will, right? The great other prophet attempts to recruit him to curse Israel. But as we know, ultimately the lesson that Bilam tries to teach him, the lesson that Bilam has to learn himself, is that reliance upon this prophet, reliance upon theurgy and the magic of these words will get you nowhere vis-a-vis this great God of Israel. And the Haftarah continues, Shimu na et asher Hashem omer. Hear now that which the Lord is saying, which God is saying, Kum riv et harim v'tishmana hagavaot kolecha. Present my case before the mountains and let the hills hear you pleading, and remember the mountains that Balak and Bilam go upon, right, so that they could their offerings and see Israel. I forget who mentioned, maybe Don points that out as well, that they can see Israel, but they go to the high places. Right? Go to the high places, and you'll remember that the very end. I'll tell you that the very end of the Haftarah will end again. Higid lecha adam ma tov. It's been told to you, O human, what is good, what is God doresh mincha, and the last one's hatzneya lechet im Elohecha, right? Walking b'tzniut. Whatever tzniut it means, we'll try to come to that in a few minutes. It probably does not mean putting yourself on top of a mountain, right, in which to, stand above, God's people and curse them. So there's some sort of potential contrast there. But Shimu harim et riv Adonai, hear you mountains, God's case. We have this in Isaiah and elsewhere, this sort of juridical or judicial or courtroom imagery, right? God has a case against, in this case, God has a case against Israel. God has a case against God's people, right? Maybe, right? Ami ma asiti lecha uma ma helaticha anevi. Here we have the ane again, right? My people testify against me. What have I done to you? What hardship have I caused you? God does this several times, right, in Tanakh as well, and in a way echoes actually Shmuel's words to the people a couple of Haftarot ago, right, at Gilgal, the coronation of Shaul with a similar language, right? Testify against me, right? What have I done against you? Anything, right? And here God says, and here we're going to approaching sort of the crux of the relevance to our parsha, verses 4, verses 5. Ki haliticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, for I took you out of Egypt. U'mibeit avadim piditicha, and I redeemed you from the house of slavery. Va'ashlach lefanecha et Moshe, Aharon, u'Miriam. And I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. As far as I know, it's the only time where she's included among that trio in this sense. Moshe, Aaron, b'choanav. We have elsewhere Moshe and Shmuel. We have elsewhere Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam as a trio. I think this is the only place. I sent before you Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. I'm going to circle back in a moment. We'll talk more about it. But Ami zechornaya ma ya'atz, and here we go. My people, remember what he plotted against you. He meaning Balak Melech Moab. Uma Anna Oto. Here's that term again, Anna, right? What he replied to him. That's how they read in JPS. But again, I'm trying to argue that maybe it has more of a not only a pun on the forensic or judicial Anevi, but also on the Me'onanim, right? How he responded in his wearing his sorcerer hat. Bilam ben Baor, ben Hashitim. Remember Shittim at the end of our parsha, right? With the women of Midian, B'Shittim, ben Hashitim ad ha Gilgal. There's our Gilgal, which we just saw in our Haftarah I just mentioned, right? That's where Shmuel, reincarnates whatever Saul, right? It's also referenced earlier though in the book of Joshua, so it's kind of right over the river. But this may be an example once again of Haftarah playing with each other, right? Referencing one another subtly, right? From Shittim all the way till Gilgal. Lama and Dad Sitkot Adonai, and you will recognize the gracious acts of the Lord. And the next verse 6, I'm going to pause because I would argue that's the people already responding to what God just said. So I'll pause for a moment. And this again is someone says to you in the elevator, you have 15 seconds. Why is this Haftarah for Parsha Balak? I would say these verses, right? These verses are the obvious place. And maybe then once you have these verses, then you start expanding and playing with it. So what's it actually saying here? So let's go back, right? God's saying to the people, what have I done against you, right? I took you out of Egypt, right? So I'm going back to the book of Exodus. Mashlach Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. Mashlach lefanecha, right? You send your messengers in front of you. You send your angels in front of you. Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav. You send your prophet in front of you. So you have here basically 3 prophets, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. And I'll say about that 2 things. One is, I know that as a trio explicitly linked together, I think this is the only place. But in our parshiyot, not Balak, but the parshiyot leading up to it, the 3 do come together, right? Both before their death, before there's a Miriam and Aaron, and then eventually, Moshe at the end of the Torah. But remember when Miriam and Aaron speak against, Moshe, for example, right? Alodota Isha, right? For this woman that he took, and God says, "Why are you challenging him, right? You are prophets, but not the way I'm a prophet not the way Moshe is a prophet, right? I speak to Moshe, face to face, mouth to mouth, right? Now with riddles, etc." What this sort of reinforces, it's basically explicit there, but it just makes it even just casts into sharper relief, is that according to these parshiyot, these 3 are all prophets. If that wasn't clear, right? They function as a family of leaders, of prophet leaders of the people. Maybe, by the way, this is really what's riling up Korach even more. It's like, it's not only Moshe, it's Aaron. There's a whole nepotistic thing, he would say cynically. We don't want to read it that way, but right, it's a whole family thing here. But that's also why Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam are so perhaps upset with Moshe, because doesn't Micha call us a unit? Aren't all 3 of us part of this? But I'd say more than that is that when you first think about, or I was thinking, actually it's only today I realized this, that you think about these 3 functioning together, really where this comes to the fore, I think, is, I know Miriam is mentioned earlier in the book of Exodus, but when they leave Egypt, right, I would say the Song of the Sea, like the apex, right, of leaving Egypt, right? And there you have, of course, Moshe leading, right? And Aaron has been part of that process. And right after, in Exodus 15, right after they leave, and they sing the Song of the Sea, Az Yashir Moshe B'nei Yisrael Tashira Hazot. So the Chumash makes a point of saying that it wasn't just Moshe who led them, right? But Tikach Miriam Neviya Achot Aharon, that Miriam, the sister of Aaron, interesting way of putting it, by the way, not the sister of Moshe, I don't know, but the sister of Aaron, right? She also leads the people, the women, right? Bata'an lahem Miriam, Yeshua Nakiko Oga Susrachvo Rama Vayam. So in a way, this is referencing back. When we think of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam together, I was thinking, it reminds me, or if you want to say it more broadly, reminds the reader, right, of those moments of Exodus in leaving Egypt, perhaps the apex of leaving Egypt. And I'd say even more so, this whole parsha sounds like a return or a return, I'd say, to the song at the sea. Specifically the end of that song, right? Shim'u amim yirgazun chilachaz yoshvei palashat. The people are starting to hear what's happening with Israel and what happened specifically with Egypt as they get closer to the land and tremble. Az nivhalu alafei Edom elei Moab yochazim murad. The tribes of the clans of Edom are dismayed. The tribes of Moab trembling grips them. No mogu kol yoshvei Chanaan, etc. In other words, I was saying this referencing back to the Song of the Sea. Let me say in the opposite direction. The Song of the Sea is actually laying out, in a sense, like the blueprint of what's to follow in the broadest strokes of much of the rest of the Chumash, right? I mean, up until the end of Midbar, they'll go through. You even have, and here I'm pushing it, but you'll forgive me. Where is it? The earth itself, even the land swallowing up. They're the enemies, but I only know one place which is really like that, which is by Korach or Datan Vabiram Badatam, and their people. So in a sense, I'm just floating by you the sense at the end of the book, Song of the Sea, sounds a lot like it's sort of like prefiguring our parshiot at the end of the Midbar, explicitly with the fear of Moab, the fear of Edom at the approach of Israel. And maybe we're not surprised to find that we have Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam all together. And then you take that or don't take that, but at the end of the day, you do have Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam all function together, all as prophets being sent or messengers at least, shlach lefanecha, by God in front of the people. Remember that. So that's on the sort of the Israel's team. And then remember the opposite team. Remember Maya Atz Balak Melech Moab. What Balak, right, Melech Moab, advised, and how Bilam ben Beor replied to him. Well, why is Micha referencing specifically, out of all the moments, right, in the story of Israel leaving the desert, specifically Balak and Bilam? As I understand, Moshe and Aaron and Miriam. Okay, so these are the major figures. But what it doesn't say here, for example, is remember what happened with, I don't know, Korach. Remember what happened with the Miraglim. Remember what happened when they murmured about the water or the meat or a lot of things. Baruch Hashem, there's lots of things to pick out from Midbar, right, that are problematic warnings, right? So why specifically Balak and Bilam? I want to suggest, I'm not sure, but I do think that, first of all, however you read it, what's clear is that when you choose this part, the choice of this as the Haftarah, it's not just because it mentions Balak and Bilam. A broader way of saying that is that the tradition realizes that for Micha, this is a very important story. And it takes it as, I would say, a paradigmatic tale to walk away with the Book of Numbers, to walk away from the Book of Numbers with. Perhaps it's a sort of representative tale even, right? And in the sense that it represents the broader lessons of the Book of Numbers, maybe even the whole thing, right? From leaving Egypt until Shittim, until Gilgal, here's a paradigmatic lesson, at least for Micha's purposes. And what strikes me is actually quite simple, is that, and I've kind of already said this, is that Balak and Bilam, right, the whole ruse rests upon the assumption that you can rely on other powerful humans, the king and the king's prophet, or his, not his prophet, but his mercenary, prophet, soothsayer, cursor, right? Rely upon this among this person to foil the God of Israel, and that's the attempt. And the point of the story is that you can't do that actually. Right? It doesn't work. And so fundamentally, right, a lesson of who is God, who is humanity, right, and what emerges from that. So in that sense, it is indeed, especially for Micha's political purposes, right, where they are concerned about these foreign kings, concerned about, I was thinking about this, sort of, Bilam is from, Aram Naharayim. It's not exactly Ashur, it isn't, but it's somewhere, over in that direction of the world, perhaps. But maybe that's also part of this. He's associating them in their past. But the point is, as they say elsewhere, rely upon God rather than your fortifications, rather than your soothsayers, rather than the Bilams who we all try to turn to at various points, right? Rather than that, right? Instead, assumedly turn towards God, right? And that will be actually the way towards true redemption. It is a historically contextualized tale. The story of Balak and Bilam is, of course, the story of Micha is, of course, but as is often the case, these sort of primary truths or teachings, right, of these prophets and these traditions, they remain timeless, right? We all try, and certainly politically, and this is a story on the paper every day, right? Try to rely on the Nidivim, try to rely upon these powers, these powerful people, and otherwise. And the point here is that's not going to work if it butts up against the will of God. And as such, the people, I think, now reply, and they say, wait a minute. This is verse 6. Bama kadem Hashem. So how exactly do I approach God then, right? You're telling me I don't do it the ways, I don't do it through, the soothsayer, and I don't do it through those powers. And he even says, and this probably is also a reference to our parsha, maybe is it going to work with a lot of olot, a lot of sacrifices? It didn't work for Bilam, right? And it's probably not in Balak and Bilam. It's probably not going to work for us either. Right? It's not going to work. What if I even give my firstborn would that work? I think there are those who would argue some, I think it was John Levinson has a book about this. He argues that you see here references to, human sacrifice and, the Havamina of human sacrifice and often firstborn, whether it's actually references some sort of extant practice or it's just sort of hyperbole and saying, even if I offer, my own Bechor, would that work? And the Haftarah ends, Higid lecha Adam matov. So I'll tell you Adam matov. And this I have to give to Michael Fishbane. I definitely would have missed this. He says, Higid lecha Adam matov, matovu alecha Yaakov. Right? You see, right, that when Bilam sees the people and goes first to bless the tents of Israel, ma tovu, how good are they? Ma tova. And the people here now, so they say, how am I in front of God? He says, well, ma tov, hagid lecha Adam ma tov. I'll tell you what is actually good. And here, hagid lecha Adam ma tov, again, Fishing points out Adam, right? The language, not hagid lecha, Jacob ma tov, hagid lecha Israel ma tov, hagid lecha Adam ma tov. Right? So perhaps it refers to sort of this general, humanity, may reference back to Adam. Adam had a lot to do with, right? A lot of tov in those early chapters of Genesis 1, and differently in 2 and 3, tov. So he gid lecha Adam tov. You're wondering what is tov. It's been told to you already. Uma Hashem doresh mimcha, and either as a continuation, right, sort of a synonym of that, or maybe it's a separate emphasis, Adam, but also Hashem specifically, right? Maybe it's revelation and sort of something more general, call it natural law. Maybe they both mean the same thing. One emphasizes the other, and that's reader's choice. What does God actually demand of you, seek of you? What does God request of you? Not these olot, not these elim, but rather 3 things. Right, 3 things. The Talmud Makot cites this verse when it says that the prophets, and each one they had 16 and 13, and they boiled down to 11, down to 3, down to 1. Here's the 3, the triad. Celebrated verse, right? It's on buildings. Kiam asot mishpat, 1, do justice, as it translates here. Ahavat chesed, love chesed, whatever, goodness, whatever chesed means. V'hatzneya lechet im Elohecha. And this is, generally translated as to walk humbly with your Lord, walk modestly with your God. B'derech klal, we have to say that this apparently is the antonym of, I would say, it's not, I'm not sure it's the antonym of the sacrifices in the previous, immediately proximate verses, but it certainly, I think, is the antonym of relying on, kavel ish, yachel of adam, and certainly the opposite of all of those things at the end of chapter 5 of the Asherah and the Psilim and all the idols, right, that reference there and all the idols that we have. Rather, what does God fundamentally want? Ma'ashem doresh micha, asot mishpat, ahavat chesed, v'hatzneat lechet im Elohecha. It's almost as if you leave, if you're leaving Parshat Bilam and you say, well, none of those things work, right? And I can't curse, that which God doesn't curse. Those powers are for not, they won't do anything, right? And it's not going to help, and the sacrifices are not going to help in that context. What does God truly want? You've actually been told already, right? And in some sense, maybe this implies that we actually already know. You've been told when? Maybe we've been told at Sinai, I don't know. Maybe we were told earlier. Maybe we know. We know. Deep inside of us, it's been told to you already. Mashem Doresh Mucha. Mishpat Chesed and Snei Lechet. I just want to say about Snei Lechet, and then we'll close. What time it is? Yeah. I'll close, or I'll stick, as I try to do, I'll stick around. People want to chat a little bit. But Hatsnei Lechet, walk Hatsnei Lechet. The term sniut, right, or the root sneut appears very rarely in Tanakh. All the commentaries, Hatsneia, by the way, I think only appears in this context, in this conjugation here. But there is a verse, and I actually pulled it out because I want to share it with you. There is a verse that Rishonim, I think Ibn Ezra and others, actually some of the medieval dictionaries, pull out as a relevant verse for understanding. I'll give you two verses actually. Relevant verse for understanding term sniut in general in our context. And this is from the book of Proverbs 11, Mishlei Perek Aleph. Let's see if I put this in the chat. There you go. Okay. And they point to what I just put in the chat, which is from Mishlei Perek Aleph. Ba zadon v'yavo kalon. Zadon kalon, right? Ba zadon v'yavo kalon v'et snuim chachma. Tumat yisharim tanchem v'selach bogdim yishadem. Lo yo'il hon b'yom evra u'tzdakat hatzil v'mavet. Tzidkat tamim tiasher darko u'v'rishato yipol rasha. You notice in this first verse that the word zadon, but if you do sort of the parallelism, but there are functions and antonyms, a contrasting parallelism. Bazadon.
Excuse me, what Perek Pasuk in Mishlei?
This is Perek Lamed Pasuk. That was Pasuk Bet.
So chapter 11, I think.
Yeah, Perek Aleph Pasuk Bet, chapter 11, right? So Zadon, which is certainly here they translate arrogance. I would say, they translate arrogance here because they're working backward from the word sanua. But I would say, as other Rishonim do, no, implies sinfulness, right? Arrogant sinfulness, right? Intentional sinfulness, right? A sinfulness which is born out of a lack of limitation in the sense of perspective of who the human being is. Bazadom vo kalon, when arrogance appears, disgrace follows. But it sounds like wisdom is associated with its snuin. So tsanua here, and this is Ibn Ezra cites this and trying to understand what does it mean hatsnei lechet. It sounds like it's somebody here they translate unassuming, but something along the lines of somebody who is righteous, but there's kind of a specific tone to that righteousness. It's the opposite of zadon. It's the tzaddik. What do they translate? It's the yesharim, right? It's the yashar person. It's the person who pursues tzedakah. Tzidkat tamim, right? Tiasher darko. And so I'd say that hatsnei alecha means, live your life righteously, im Elohecha, right, walking right with your God. And I have to say, by the way, that while the term, it's the root of sanua, right, appears infrequently, the root of tamim, which is I think associated in this passage with that appears all over the place, and often in a sense of walking. Noach ish sadik tamim haya b'dorotav et Elohim, which means im Elohim, right? I assume. Et Elohim hitalech Noach, right? Lech lefanai veheye tamim, right? By Abraham, and all over Tanakh. I looked earlier today. Tamim and like the derech, right, of the tam, right? The wholesome path the walking, right, all come together. And very, what's that? Certainly walking, right. Certainly walking in my way and in my chukotai, the sense of walking all the time. Specifically, I think it's interesting, let's say the Noach verse is very, I think, telling, right? Tamim hayavodarav et Elohim hitalech Noach. So walking with God in the sense of tamim, right? Of being tamim, whole, devoted, right? Loyal, obedient, righteous. But again, with the specific tone color to it. And I do think that the notion of tzniut, certainly in rabbinic literature, the tznuim sometimes sound like the righteous ones, but Chazal certainly read it. I'll say this, and I'll end with this. They do read it in the sense of tznius, right? We call it tznius, right? A sense of humility about it, a quietness, right? A unassumingness about it, right? And they say, for example, what does it mean? Hatzneilech Elohecha, the Talmud and Sukkah, Hatzneilech Elohecha, that when you should be sort of sanua when you are escorting a chatan v'kala or God forbid, a mate, right? When you're escorting a bride and groom. The point being the walking. They take it literally. You can walk in a tsanua way. And the way they understand that is that you're walking with God in that moment. You're literally walking with God. Those are things which are public by nature. But one can do them or should do them, or bidden by Micha, even those things in the sense of hatsneya, in the sense of unassuming, right? It's not about me, it's about something beyond myselfness. And kal v'chomer, as they say, the things which are by their nature more tsanua should be pursued with a sense of tzniut, right? A sense of, and here by means tzniut, I mean simply that it not be about myself. It's unassuming in the sense it's not about me. It's certainly not zadon. There's a tamim sense to it, right? There's a sense in which we're devoted servants in that sense, and we're walking with God, if you will, doing God's work. Et Elohim hitalech Noach. Some would translate all, and with this, et Elohim, right? Walk with God, but sort of walk in a godly way, right? Do the God walk, right? In the world, to enact God in the world. And all of this is, the call of Micha in very strong distinction from the attempt of Balak, right? Melech Moav, to recruit Bilam, right? The counter Moshe, right? The great anti-hero who can best these people, these descendants of Abraham, who are those who bless them will be blessed, curse them will be cursed. No, it doesn't work. Actually, at the end of the day, ma Hashem doresh mincha, ma tovu, ma Hashem doresh mincha. What is actually tov? Asot mishpat chesed, hatzneya lechet im Elohecha, and that's how the Haftarah leads us. Okay, so those are the words of Micha, and I'll have to say I'm struck week after week how utterly timeless and timely these ancient words seem to be, in the deepest, most relevant sense that could possibly be.
I had a different take on this whole Haftarah, on this whole parsha. It seemed to me that we're told this, like God is pulling back the curtain and showing us what goes on that we don't see. We wouldn't know about Balak and Bilam if not for Hashem telling us. Because they're up on, I always picture it, they're up on the cliff and they're doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
And we're down on the bottom.
Right.
And so we wouldn't know and we wouldn't know about it.
Right. That's why some people say, right, that also this idea, why are we emphasizing the Gemara about Yadala that Moshe wrote the Parsha? Because you might have
exactly.
What does Moshe know about this? This is happening off screen,
right.
Something.
Right. So Hashem is telling us that sometimes you have no idea what's going on or what disaster has been averted.
Oh, interesting.
And that's one. Two, that didn't work. So Bilam says, like his last parting shot is, if they misbehave, then you can get them. That's their Achilles heel.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the ending of this Haftarah.
It's the rectification of what I'm saying.
That how to behave, that's the parallel.
Yeah, that's very good. That's all. Yeah, the Midrash is what you're saying. You're saying the Midrash, which says,
I
right,
don't know.
Davar Bilam. Well, the first part I'm saying is Davar Bilam, right? That Balak says to him exactly this, like, their God hates znut, right? So here's what we're gonna do. And the Torah mentions Shittim, right? Their God hates znut, and indeed. So then your point, though, that this is in response to that is very interesting. Yeah.
Right. That's
That's
the
very interesting.
reverse. It's
Mhm.
like the black image of of the picture.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you. Great. Total addition.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Okay, so it appears to me that juxtaposing Aaron, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam against Balak, Bilam, that Micha, this is what Micha is doing. He too faces this same problem. There are Nevi'e Sheker, and then there are a few Nevi'e Emet. There's Micha, and then he has Hosea with him a little bit, but they're up against a lot of chatter in Jerusalem, in Yehuda, about how we should proceed, which is totally wrong. And we have Miriam, Moshe, and Aaron are the manhige ruchani. They're the spiritual leaders of the people. And Balak and Bilam, they're so transactional. They're like the anti-spiritual leaders. And Micha has the same problem. The people, his people are doing all of these things because they think they'll work. And he says to them, none of this is going to work. This will not protect you. Look at the North. They did the same thing and it didn't protect them. And so he has to, he turns back and he says, you have to listen to me. Like he's Yirmiyahu, you have to listen to me. Well, what is that? What does God want from you? He doesn't want that sacrifice. He doesn't want your firstborn children. He doesn't want all this garbage. He wants mishpat and tzedek, which goes all the way back to Abraham, all the way back. That's what I want. Mishpat, tzedek, and the tzniut is, as you said, it's the unassuming humility. It's not this big houses and your puffery and how many, korbanot you bring in. It's all fake. Yeah, a little humility is required here.
I meant to mention that, by the way, lo yo'il hon b'yom evra. That's why I put it in here, right? Your wealth. It takes a lot of wealth to offer a lot of sacrifices, right? So it's a similar point, and also, of course, the higher, bilam. So it's like that none of these are going to help you, and you're totally right. Yeah, the reference in Jeremiah, if you're interested in Yirmiyahu, is in chapter 26. If you want to look it up later on, chapter 26 of Jeremiah is where basically, right, the people are, not happy with Yirmiyahu's prophecies. You're going to die. How could you prophesize this? Etc. So Yirmiyahu says, "What are you talking? Oh, what are you talking about? I'm saying what God said to do." And some of the Ziknei Haaretz get up and they say, "Don't you guys remember this guy Micha the Morashite, Micha Hamorashi? He also was Miba those times, right? And he said these things, and no one said kill him. We realized that he actually was a Navi Emet, and a Navi Emet, not Navi Sheker, etc." So
it's very.
I guess I'm trying to amplify your point, which is is well taken, which is that maybe a theme of the parsha, if I'm hearing you correctly, I'm saying this to I'm getting you. A theme of the parsha is, who's the Navi Emet versus Navi Sheker in some sense, right? You got, and it's hard to tell sometimes which is which, but
and it's so sad. Between Micha and Yirmiyahu, it's over 100 years, and nothing has changed. It's very sad.
Nothing has changed.
And Amos spoke about Parot HaBashan and how they were their opulence and their decadence. And
that also, I should say, not only the hone and the Markavot, was your Susim and your Markavot that Micha said earlier, right? We'll go with that's Egypt stuff, quintessentially, right? It's also it's all the same point, right?
And their disdain for the poor, right?
Mighty, the empire, right?
And the rot, right?
And the rock, right? New. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and learning with us today. It's always a pleasure. I just want to highlight one upcoming class. Mishnah in Depth has returned to live class with Horiod, which will be finishing up this coming Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern here with Dr. Cole. And if you want to start with our next, and for the week following that is our next book, which is Zvachim, also on Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern with Dr. A.B. Wallfish. Thank you everyone for coming today.
Yeah, actually that's actually a new seder that's already Kachim. Dr. Kolp is a great guy, a great teacher who just started teaching choreo. Give it a shot, take a look at it on YouTube. He'll actually be teaching Talmud with us this coming academic year, which we're very excited about. Stay tuned for more announcements. But yeah.